Frigate 318 Heavy is inbound, and MAC rounds have been authorized.
MAC rounds? In atmosphere?
One way to get their attention. Hang on to your teeth, people.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the Paris class will pull from every resource available. I'm sure you've heard, but if you can, please hit that like button. It seems like YouTube is making likes more important than ever. And be sure to check out the store that is linked under the videos. There's a ton of cool stuff, you'll just have fun window shopping. And if you want to pick up something that is my shop, so it all helps to keep this channel alive. But let's get into it. The Paris-class heavy frigate was conceived during the insurrection in the Outer Colonies, which was well before the Covenant arrived in 2525. So in the decades leading up to First Contact, the UNSC was in an undeclared civil war against secessionist rebels that were collectively referred to as insurrectionists. These insurgents frequently resorted to guerrilla warfare and even open space combat, capturing UNSC ships and eventually leading to full-on ship-to-ship battles. There was a great disparity between the strength of different rebel cells, because some amassed entire fleets of stolen or secretly built warships. And facing this escalating threat, the UNSC realized it just needed more firepower. The Paris-class heavy frigate was born from that need, designed and introduced in 2523 as a direct response to the human insurrectionists. So it came out only 2 years before we met the Covenant. The Paris-class was not built to fight aliens, but to fight other humans. And as some of the oldest of humanity's intuitions about goddesses of war and wisdom, there is this timeless human struggle that we hate war, but it does strengthen our species overall. And the timing here couldn't be more perfect, as our civil war in space prepped our species for the coming war with aliens. When we finally were invaded by the Covenant, we already had battle-hardened leadership and vessels that had been tested for decades. And despite sharing the general layout of earlier UNSC frigates, it was a significant step up in size and firepower. It followed the same basic design lineages as its predecessors, the Charon class and Stalwart class light frigates, with the characteristic twin forward hull booms, these long rectangular sections that stick out towards the front. The upper boom housed the ship's primary weapon, a 65 P8V1 magnetic accelerator cannon, or MAC, which ran basically along the entirety of the frigate's spine. The whole ship was built around this main gun, which is a common trait for UNSC warship design. Their joke is that they're just like the UNSC rifles, so they're bullpup ships, trying to get as long a barrel as possible into each platform, be it the rifles or the ships. At around 535 meters long, it was a decent bit longer than the Charon, at 490 meters, and Stalwart at 478 meters. This extra length allowed engineers to install additional magnetic accelerator coils for the MAC. When you look at how this thing works, each of those coils is amplifying the energy, and so simply having more does boost the projectile's velocity and thus overall firepower. So though it is hard to notice when we see it being used, the Paris's main gun does hit harder than the MACs on lighter frigates, all part of this clear design philosophy that they just needed a ship that packed the biggest punch possible, which really shows the increased concern over how many military-grade ships the insurgents got their hands on. And to that end, the Paris-class heavy frigate carries a far heavier armament than the other frigates. 26 M58 Archer missile pods arrayed all across its hull, more than double the missile batteries on the Charon, which only had 10 pods. These ship-to-ship Archer missiles were relatively effective against the unshielded hulls of rebel ships, or Covenant vessels once their shields were stripped away. Firing them before the shield was down was kinda useless. They were easily absorbed and even shot down by the Covenant's point defense lasers. For close defense, the hull is covered in 12 M870 Rampart point defense guns, which is triple the number of automated turrets on the lighter frigates like the Charon. And this dense network of roof-mounted cannons could fill space with overlapping fields of fire, shredding incoming fighters, boarding craft, or missiles before they could reach the Paris or its allies. And then we have the 12 Harpoon nuclear missile silos, which were set into the central hull. This gave the Paris a potent option to eliminate hardened targets, but like mentioned in the last video, it's not like a single nuke could take down a Covenant shield.
Arm the nuclear warhead. Proximity detonator at 100 meters. Fire! Three, two.
Sensors coming back on. All longsword interceptors vaporized. Covenant ship? Intact, sir.
No.
It is moving off though, sir. Most likely to make repairs.
For comparison, the other frigates only carried around a few nukes, and that 12 is 4 times what we get on the Charon class. But with all this power on offense, there are some trade-offs. Most of its internal volume is dedicated to reactors, ammunition, and structural reinforcements for those weapons, which left little room for cargo or troop capacity. Unlike the Charon class, which could carry hundreds of troops, vehicles, and dropships for sustained planetary assaults and recapture, the Paris had a minimal hangar bay and very limited ground deployment capacity. It could launch a few GA-TL-1 longsword fighters or some shuttles, but could not transport large armies or vehicle columns the way a Charon or even Stalwart could. Its air wing and marine complement were comparatively small, around 600 personnel in total with crew and passengers. The designers were deliberately sacrificing troop capacity and atmospheric capability, really wanting to dominate in space combat. Heavily laden with armor and armaments, Paris wasn't as nimble in atmosphere or suited for landing operations, but in the vacuum of space it really did strike terror into the enemy, even being able to hold its own pitched battle, rather than like we saw with the Charon and Stalwart, which are supposed to act more like support vessels. The Paris-class frigates were often deployed in groups, also called wolf packs, which we did see with the other frigates, but these were far more effective. Multiple heavy frigates coordinating to overwhelm a single target with MAC rounds and missiles from all sorts of angles. To give them credit, the Charon worked out a lot of the kinks here, a great proof of concept, as the Wolfpacks were excellent in their counter-insurgency role, hunting down pirate corsairs or rebel destroyers, and so now when you're doing this with a more powerful ship, Paris Wolfpacks were effective even against Covenant tech. 3 of them in an arrowhead formation could volley their MAC guns together for a concentrated punch, kind of like what the Marathon was going for, while a larger defensive line of 4 of them in the so-called shield formation created an overlapping gauntlet of point defense, which made it nearly impossible for any strike craft to get past them. In this way, it does blur the line between traditional frigate and destroyer, as it had the aggressive mindset and firepower of a small destroyer, but in this slightly more compact and cost-effective package, which of course was intentional. The UNSC wanted a ship that could be built in large numbers and plugged into many roles, as escorts for capital ships, as picket hunters eliminating enemy raiders, or stepping up to be the spearhead of an attack in the absence of larger ships. The Paris could fulfill all these roles well. You just needed enough of them. And again, you do see the desperation here. More insurgent uprisings means let's just make a ship that was fast and powerful and quick to make. Send them out as soon as they roll off the assembly line, and destroy the rebel fleets outright before they can get it in their head that they might have a proper organized navy. When the Human Covenant War erupted, the Paris-class commanders were shook by this alien shielding.
Energy shields. That's amazing.
Bring the ship around and arm the MAC.
In the devastating firepower that even the smallest Covenant ships packed. But once they got their footing, they did prove to be ferociously effective, especially on a ton-for-ton basis, always punching up. UNSC High Command ramped up production, and it would end up being one of, if not the most constructed UNSC ship types by the war's end. They fought in virtually every major engagement of the war. One of the very first Covenant skirmishes at Kai Seti in 2525 involved the UNSC Commonwealth, which was on its mission to deploy Spartans. Now, the Commonwealth did take heavy damage in that encounter, but as would be the theme for this ship, they usually did hold on long enough to at least make a difference, at least allowing other UNSC assets to finish the fight. Dozens of them were seen during the Fall of Reach, in the Epsilon Eridani system and its colonies, and earlier in that campaign, the UNSC Grafton famously provided devastating fire support to UNSC Army troopers at Zerdek Ridge, using its MAC guns to obliterate a Covenant ground emplacement. The Grafton was later destroyed by a Covenant supercarrier, but only after delivering these critical blows to the enemy, managing to destroy the invasion force's uplink tower shortly before being taken out, while the UNSC Savannah played a pivotal role in Operation Uppercut, sacrificing itself to take down that same Covenant supercarrier by detonating a makeshift slipspace bomb. So all these examples show how the Paris-class frigates were used aggressively in battle, often being the first in and the last out, buying time for everyone else, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And so with these 3 frigates, you do say they struck a great balance. Charons are for moving assets, for making sure you have boots on the ground, that you can hold off some attack or retake some location, and actually hold on to it, not just as a point on the map, but with real people manning some facility there. The Stalwart fits this middle role. Maybe you don't need as many planet-side forces, and the Paris is pure strength, the best for ship-to-ship warfare. That's it for its breakdown. Again, if you can, please hit that like button. Tiny things like that really do help keep channels alive. And check out the shop linked right under the video. There's tons of cool stuff there, I'm sure you'll like something. But most important of all, remember, sometimes all you really need is more firepower. And may the domain preserve you. Always.